Good morning and welcome back. You're watching World News and I'm your host, Klaudia Czerwińska. Let's begin. British Typhoon fighter jets have flown over Poland in their first NATO air defense mission following the violation of Polish airspace by Russian drones last week. Two of RAF's Typhoons patrolled the Polish skies as part of NATO's Eastern Sentry, aiming to bolster European security. The jets took off from a military base in England on Friday night with an objective to deter and defend against any possible threats coming from Russia. Following their mission, the jets returned to the UK early Saturday morning. The British Defence Ministry announced the mission via a press release, adding that London's partnership with NATO has never been stronger. Poland has concluded protective operations in its airspace after scrambling its aircraft in response to another series of Russian airstrikes on Ukraine, involving hundreds of missiles and drones. This comes as Germany and France are deploying their own aircraft to patrol Poland's airspace following an incursion of Russian drones into the country last week.
Russia continues its airstrikes on Ukrainian cities, once again targeting the country's west, close to its border with Poland and NATO. The last time such an attack took place, a significant number of Russian drones flew into Poland's airspace, prompting Warsaw to take up preemptive action.
Polish and Allied aircraft are operating in our airspace, while ground-based air defense and radar reconnaissance systems have been brought to the highest state of readiness.
The operations have since subsided due to a halt in Russia's strikes on Ukraine. Those allies Poland's operational command reference in its post on social media include Danish, German and French pilots who arrived in Poland on Friday to bolster the country's air defenses.
We are ready 24/7 to take off on demand. The demand comes from the chain of command of the NATO, and we are able, when necessary, to take off and be ready for any mission.
The Allied reinforcements' arrival in Poland follows calls for increased NATO presence at the alliance's eastern flank.
The Ukrainian Air Force released a video showing what it said were F-16 fighter jets and mobile defense units shooting down incoming drones. The released footage has not yet been verified when it comes to its location or the date it was shot. It comes following Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky's comments on the overnight attack Moscow launched on Ukraine on Saturday. At least 3 people were killed and dozens more suffered injuries. Zelensky took to the Telegram app saying Russia launched 580 drones and 40 missiles to carry out the attack. Ukrainian air defenses reportedly shot down 552 of the drones and 31 of the missiles. The attack targeted civilian infrastructure. Czech President Petr Pavel said that despite risks of escalation, it is not possible to give in to evil, advocating for shooting down Russian aircraft and drones that enter NATO airspace. This opinion has been echoed by Lithuanian Defense Minister Dovile Sakaliene, who called on the alliance to take Russian provocations more seriously.
I must describe this as an extremely irresponsible behavior, because violating airspace is grounds for activating defense mechanisms and thus shooting down such an aircraft. And surely, no one on our side or on the Russian side would want that. I believe that at this time we must be absolutely clear that if rules are broken, we must respond appropriately, including militarily. Russia will very quickly realize that they have made a mistake and crossed acceptable boundaries. But unfortunately, this really is balancing on the edge of conflict. But it is simply not possible to give in to evil.
The Czech city of Ostrava has become the home to NATO Days, the largest security exhibition in Europe. The 2-day event features demonstrations by military security and rescue personnel from 60 NATO member states and coincides with the Czech Air Force Days at the neighboring Mošnov airport. The annual show is expected to attract over 200,000 visitors from the Czech Republic and abroad. With no attendance fee, visitors are able to see NATO equipment and soldiers up close. The Czech Air Force Days, meanwhile, featured marvelous displays by Air Force of several NATO members. Attendees could marvel at aircraft from the UK, Turkey, Croatia, as well as the RAF Falcons parachute team and a flyover by the American B-52H Stratofortress strategic bomber. First, it was Fitch who downgraded its outlook on Poland's debt. Now it's Moody's, which revised its credit outlook from stable to negative. However, Poland did maintain its long-term credit rating score of A2 with a low risk of default. Now, Kazimierz Łysiak explains how the conflict between the centrist government and the new conservative president is hurting Poland's debt credibility.
Poland's economy is growing by close to 3% annually, but the latest credit outlook change by Moody's is a warning sign for the government.
If the government is unable to address spending pressure and hurdles to raise revenue, it would denote weaker fiscal strength and policy effectiveness compared to our current assessment.
The agency says the main reason behind the change is the ongoing conflict between the centrist government led by Prime Minister Donald Tusk and the conservative president backed by the opposition Law and Justice Party.
Your veto, Mr. President, blocked a bill which included much more regulations than just social benefits.
I'm surprised now to see criticism from the government.
Karol Nawrocki has already vetoed more bills in the first month of his presidency than his predecessor Andrzej Duda in a year and a half. And that attitude doesn't make it easy for the government to lower Poland's record-high deficit.
The agency is stating it looks as if the outlook for Poland, for the fiscal policy, would be such that whatever the government would like to do to cut the budget deficit, the president will veto it, and therefore there will be no change in the dynamics of the increase of the debt.
The credit rating shows how much investors can trust Poland to pay off its debts. The lower the rating, the bigger the interest rates the country has to pay when borrowing money. The credit outlook, on the other hand, is more of a yellow card, and it can have tangible consequences.
The message is the following. The risk has increased somehow and is likely to increase in the future. So if I were you, I would demand higher interest rate for this for the bonds if the government wants you to buy its bonds.
Poland's government deficit for 2026 could be as high as 64 billion euros. This is partly caused by its robust defense spending at close to 5% of its gross domestic product, the highest percentage in all of NATO.
If you've got some expenditures growing, then either you should, if you want to keep the deficit under control, you should increase the revenue, or to cut the other spending.
And that hasn't happened. The change of the outlook by Moody's therefore means that Poland could have its credit rating cut in the future. For now, it enjoys its comfortable A2 score and a steady growth of GDP. For TVP World, I'm Kazimierz Łysiak.
Serbia has held a big military parade involving 10,000 soldiers and new equipment. The authorities in Belgrade have described the show as the biggest display of army strength in the history of the republic.
The parade marks the day of Serb unity, freedom, and the national flag, a holiday celebrated since 2020. To flex its military muscles, Belgrade displayed tanks, missile systems, and fighter jets.
It's sending the messages that you mentioned, that any opponents of the regime can count on a very strong response from the government, and also that the sort of a regional message to show that even though Serbia is not within NATO, it's very capable of defending itself.
Serbia, a non-NATO country, is surrounded by members of the alliance. Belgrade has maintained close ties with Moscow and Beijing, but it's a candidate to join the European Union. The parade also comes as nationwide student-led protests continue across the country. The mass outrage was sparked by a tragic incident in Novi Sad, where a concrete canopy at a train station collapsed, killing 16 people in November last year. Since then, Serbians keep relentlessly protesting the government corruption they say is partially to blame for the tragedy.
And I think this message of today's parade is that he will do this if necessary, that he will also call upon the army to stop these protests.
Despite previous police crackdowns on the protesters, as the parade ensued, demonstrators took to the streets in Belgrade.
The relationship between Turkey and the EU has deteriorated, said Kıvanç Ulusoy, a professor of political science from the Istanbul University, in an interview for TVP World when asked about the West's response to the Turkish government's crackdown on its opposition.
The EU lost credibility not in the eyes of just the politicians, but also the people at large. Once I remember, the support for EU membership was more than 70%. Now it's less than 50%. So this shows how Turkish people look at the EU. EU, has been treating Turkey in an instrumental way just to keep the migrants out of Europe. This is what we see, and the support, EU support for Turkish democratization is so low, almost ineffective, I should say. That's why the current government does what it does.
Bulgaria has set a new Guinness World Record for the largest dog cake in the world. The culinary creation weighs an impressive 305 kilograms and 800 grams and can feed 300 medium to large dogs or even as many as 3,700 chihuahuas.
We were invited to make the cake, which was an extraordinary pleasure and honor for us because it required an enormous effort. For over 7 days, my entire team of 5 people worked tirelessly to create this incredible masterpiece. Believe me, assembling it and making each element look like a real cake was extremely difficult. The hardest part was that we didn't use any preservatives, which was a huge challenge.
In order to break the previous record, the weight of the cake needed to be exceeded. So we took the measurements, the overall dimensions, but the record is based on the overall weight. So what we did today was, because the cake is on a table, we had taken the weight of the table to subtract it from the final total, which gave us a total of 305.8 kilograms.
And so this delicious report from the world of doggo snacks closes our news broadcast. Thank you very much for joining. I'm Klaudia Czerwińska and I hope to see you back here on TVP World in just a moment.